This is a talk about the state of the VR ecosystem. I put this talk together, and I try to do this every year from the, if I put myself in the shoes of a developer, and I spend a very many number of years of my career being a developer for platforms like this one, what would I want to know? What would I want to know about the VR ecosystem? And if you don't know me, my name is Chris Pruett. I run games for Meta. Mainly that means that all third-party VR software is basically managed by my group. If it's being built by somebody like you folks and it's shipping in VR, then probably my team touches it. We run the Oculus Publishing program, which is our in-house publisher. It's actually, I think, one of the largest publishers in the world. We also have programs like Start, and we do a bunch of other work basically to make sure that the content of our Quest headsets is as high quality as possible. And because Quest headsets are overwhelmingly used for video games, almost all the work that my team does is related to games. And today I thought I would just talk a little bit about like what the last year has looked like and kind of where we think we're going. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the way that we think about the future. We've talked before, the previous years, I've talked about sort of audience shifts and sort of how we sort of think about what's coming in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm going to spend some time doing that today too. And then I'll finish up with a little bit of technical discussion because I always love that stuff. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge that it is a pretty rough time for the game industry at this moment. Like, I have been in the industry for almost 30 years at this point. I think this is the roughest period I've ever seen. It's rough for everybody. It's rough for VR. We're not immune. In fact, when we look at our trends compared to sort of the greater game industry, they track pretty closely. And I think it's just it's like a very challenging time. Nobody knows exactly what to build. The software that used to sell is not selling the way that it used to in the future, and it's resulted in a lot of layoffs, studio closures. Even us at Meta are not immune. Earlier this year, you may have heard that we shut down several of our studios, and those were, make no mistake, those were top-class studios. Those were, I think, very few peers in their level for the level of quality that they were able to produce. But also, when I think about that, the state of the industry is somewhat galvanizing, right? Like if I look at the market, I know there's a bunch of things I can't control. Like we are subject in VR to the same shifts and cultural changes and macroeconomic changes and things that affect the game industry that I don't have any control over. But on the other hand, okay, if we want our little corner of the game industry to survive, we can't rest on our laurels. So today I'm going to tell you about a whole bunch of stuff that we're working on. We have new hardware. We have new audiences that we're looking at. We have a whole bunch of video games. There's our investment in the Quest ecosystem and the Quest hardware line remains extremely high. In fact, we have a bunch of very welcome competition from other companies these days. But even so, we're by far the largest investors of VR in the world. So let me start by taking a look back at 2025. I'd like to spend a little bit of time just looking at numbers. There's a lot of, I think, narratives out there. People have their own anecdotal experience when they ship on our platform. Sometimes that gets sort of projected into a narrative. And so every year I like to just do a little checkpoint. Okay, well, how did the ecosystem actually go? One of the narratives I've heard is VR is shrinking, VR is dead. Well, the reality is we actually hit the most number of active users we've ever had in our history last year. There's more people in 2025 in a Quest headset than we've ever had in any VR headset ever before in any previous year. So basically our usage and our user base is growing year over year. I hear a lot of stories about revenue in the Quest store. So let's take a minute to talk about revenue. Overall, the Quest store revenue, the amount of money that we pay out to developers is up between 2024 and 2025. It's up slightly. It's not a huge increase. And actually, if you look at the overall game industry is up 1%. So we're tracking pretty close to the sort of norm for the rest of the industry, but it's up. And what's important to understand about 2025, revenue staying, fairly steady is that this is a year where we didn't launch hardware. And we're comparing it to 2024, which is the year we launched Quest 3S. And you might, as you might imagine, when we launch hardware, it causes the revenue generally to spike because we have a whole bunch of new users come in and they buy a bunch of stuff in the store. So being able to achieve the same level of revenue, slight increase level of revenue year over year in a year where we didn't launch any hardware is actually a pretty significant achievement. And it is primarily the effect of improvements we've made to the platform, improvements in the way that developers have marketed their content, things like that. Premium apps also remain the single largest contributor to our overall revenue. They're by far the biggest part of the pie. But in-app purchase is growing pretty quickly. It grew over 10% in the last year. And what's interesting about in-app purchase is that it's becoming more aggregated across a larger number of applications. Like in 2024, there was a fairly small number of titles that were sort of driving nearly all of the in-app purchase revenue. But now in 2025, that number has actually grown quite a bit. So not only is the total amount of revenue up, but it's distributed more evenly across a larger number of titles. I think the stat we had was the number of titles that made $500,000 or more last year was up by 20% using in-app purchase. Also, subscriptions are up too. Like, this is kind of an interesting sidebar because subscriptions aren't really associated with video games on our platform, but subscriptions are also up like double-digit percent. They're an overall small part of our ecosystem. They don't contribute as much as premium apps or in-app purchase. They know we're close, but they're up. They're growing. If you were looking for a stat that sort of indicated whether or not developers are finding success, I mean, the thing that I can tell you is we had over 100 titles last year take home $1 million or more on the platform. And I think that's an important stat because one of the other narratives I've heard is like, well, nobody's making money. Not true. We actually have a large segment of developers making money. Actually, we should actually look at some of the things that did well last year, just as an example. I live and breathe this stuff. Like, I'm in these things all the time, but it occurs to me that if you are an external developer and you're not like, sitting there refreshing the Quest store every single day, you might actually know which things, happen to be the most popular at the moment. I picked a couple of examples here, and I picked these examples not because they're, the biggest or because they are, necessarily representative of the whole. I actually picked them because they're diverse, and I want to show you kind of like the range of titles that did quite well on our platform last year. First, we got Hard Bullet, which is sort of a sandboxy shooter. It sells for $20. It's a premium app. There's UGG. There's a talk by the UGG folks later today, I believe. That's a free-to-play, teen-focused early access game. Did very well. Came out second half of the year and has done very well. And the Thrill of the Fight 2 is essentially a boxing simulator aimed at adults. It's done quite well as well. It's also a $20 video game. And what I'm trying to show here is that like one of the memes I hear is like, there's only one genre that works. There's only one audience that works. I don't think that's true. It's not borne out by our data. In the theme of revenue, I want to talk a little bit about Meta Horizon Plus. I'm actually going to spend a couple slides on this because I actually feel like maybe Meta Horizon Plus is not well understood, or maybe you don't even know what it is. Meta Horizon Plus is a subscription service that we've launched. We had it going for a couple of years now. It's very similar to other game, subscription services where you pay like $8 a month and you get 2 free games every month, and then there's a back catalog of 100 titles you can access anytime for free. And I think it's like a fairly well understood shape for a subscription game service. But we actually designed this program very carefully. And we designed it because, and if you allow me to sort of stand on a soapbox a little bit, I actually am a little bit uncomfortable with the way that some game subscription services work. I don't think they're sustainable for developers. Like the idea that you collect a small amount of money from a very large number of people and you somehow pay that out to developers, but not in an ongoing way, doesn't seem sustainable to me. Like if the developers who are building the content that runs your subscription aren't getting paid, like how will you continue to run the thing in the future? Like it doesn't make sense to me. So we designed this particular program to be a revenue source for developers. It's not your main revenue source. It's designed to be a supplemental revenue source. But we pay developers out on an ongoing basis, and we make minimum guarantees. And I think it's important to think about the design of these types of programs, because it's very easy to say everybody wants Netflix for games. But when you do the economic model, it's actually pretty hard to make it make sense for devs. And we put a lot of time into making it make sense for devs. The model basically that we've adopted is we keep the catalog pretty small. It's highly curated. We only put really good things in there. And we're kind of looking for hidden gems, like things that launched and they got great user ratings and they had good metrics, but for whatever reason, they didn't do as well as we sort of expected them to do. And we feel like, man, this title needs more, folks should play this. It needs more access. That's the type of title we're looking for Meta Horizon Plus. Last year, we made a self-serve application thing where you can go into your developer dashboard, and there's several eligibility criteria you have to meet first. You have to have a certain star rating and you have to have a certain number of users per month. if you don't meet those things, you're like just not even eligible to apply. But if you do, you can apply, and we'll consider including your application in this program. I will say we're pretty picky about it, but the reason that it works is because we're picky. Just to give you some of the numbers, last year we hit over 1 million subscribers. There's over 100 titles in the catalog, as I mentioned, and we paid out $20 million to developers who are participating in the program. Like I said, this is not a program that would like fully fund your video game, but it is an important source of supplemental revenue, and it's important particularly for a certain class of customers. And I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. The main reason for us to pursue this program is not just to deliver revenue to developers, but to make it easy for people who are brand new to VR to access a whole bunch of high quality stuff without spending any money. I'll come back to that point in a little bit. A quick note about Oculus Publishing. Oculus Publishing, as I mentioned, is our internal publisher. We offer support in the form of technical support, strategic guidance, funding, production support to developers with the goal of increasing the quality of the software on our platform. Like I very firmly believe that customers respond first and foremost to quality. And so we spend a bunch of time and resources and money on bringing games to the platform and maximizing their quality on the platform. Last year we shipped 140 video games, which is why I think we're probably one of the larger publishers in the world. But you know, it's not the case that you have to be in the publishing program to be successful on the platform. In fact, increasingly, we're seeing hits come out of other places. We're seeing them come out of like our START program, for example, or we're seeing them come out of completely organic, you know, developer who built something, shipped on our platform, never talked to us, we never heard of them before, we don't know what it is, and it rockets up the charts. And so last year we looked at that pattern, and we thought, well, how can we extend our publishing services to account for those titles that have already found some degree of success? And what we did is we created an accelerator program. And the accelerator program basically looks for things that have, you know, great early metrics, and then it tries to use funding and support to double down on those titles and make them even larger. This worked out really well for us in 2025. We're going to continue it this year. And just finishing off the sort of look back stuff, we talked about the Ignition program several times, and I kind of want to just put a bow on it. Ignition program was a program that we started a couple of years ago in order to fund new startups from folks who had been laid off in the game industry. We're sort of looking at these sort of unprecedented layoffs across the industry and thinking, wow, you know, there's a lot of people who are going to start new game studios. Is there a way we could help them sort of bootstrap those studios and also hopefully, you know, get them interested in VR at the same time? And so we ran this Ignition program. We ended up having 21 companies participate. We funded all of them to build a prototype. They bootstrapped their companies. They built their prototypes. I've talked about it several times. Last year we had a bunch of demos and videos to show you just to finish off this program because it is now complete. The final stats were that all 21 of the developers we worked with delivered their final prototypes. 90% of them told us that they're going to continue development of their project. 3 of them have already launched. They're in early access, which is pretty cool. And then we have 3 titles that have publishing deals, including one from us. So I actually think this is like a huge success. Like we were able to strategically spend money in order to help you know, companies bootstrap new startups, find other funding, get their projects off the ground in a time when the game industry is going through some of the most dire financial straits that I think I've ever seen. So we felt really good about this, and it's something we will consider again for the future. All right, that's the wrap up. That's the sort of the look back. Now let's talk about what's next. Where are we going and what's next? Now, I said kind of at the top that we have new hardware coming. It's true. I'm not going to talk about it. We're not ready to talk about it, but we do. We have new devices in development. We have multiple devices in development. They're going to be super cool. When we're ready to talk about them, you won't be able to get us to shut up about them. But our investment in VR hardware remains large and ongoing. I want to talk about some important changes to the Quest store. And if you were here yesterday, Mancy, who is the PM of the Quest store, she actually gave a full talk about how the store operates, how our promotional slots work, all the improvements we made last year. If you missed it, you should go back and watch it on YouTube because it's actually, if you're shipping on our platform, it's like super important information to have. But I'll give you the speed run just so you get the idea. You know, we did a bunch of work to increase the quality of our product detail pages. So we brought the logo way up, we brought everything up into a little box, made the purchase button right there, put all the badging in one spot, with the goal of trying to increase conversion rate of our titles. We made a bunch of new promotional slots on the store itself. We have this big spotlight up the top, and then as you scroll, there's these new sort of interstitial slots that allow us to promote titles as you're sort of scrolling down. And although it's not shown here, we also created this long form editorial page that we can use to sort of promote bundles of games, like during events or holidays, things like that. A lot of improvement here. And I think this work contributed to our ability to hold revenue steady year over year without a hardware launch. We also increased the quality of our taxonomy. Taxonomy for apps for us is like how you put apps in particular categories or genres. And it's important to get right because if somebody searches for, they want to play a multiplayer deathmatch shooter that with cell shading or something, then they need to be able to like drill into the catalog that way. And having an accurate taxonomy allows us to do that. So we shipped a significantly improved taxonomy. Helps like organic search, but also allows you with the UI to sort of drill down into very specific subcategories of content. These are all fine and good. These are great. These are the types of regular incremental improvements that we're always making to the store. I just wanted to highlight a few that we made last year. We also have a very large change that we've made to the store that I want to spend a few minutes talking about. And that's that as of today, the individual Horizon worlds have been removed from our App Store. So I want to spend a minute and talk about this one because, boy, we got a lot of feedback about it. Last year, let me back up a little bit. I want to talk about the decision process that we go through for something like this. Like, how do we decide to put Horizon Worlds in our App Store to begin with, and then how do we decide to take them out? And the way to think about it for us is that we are, basically, Meta does not want to make decisions without a bunch of data backing them. We don't want to like operate on our assumptions. We have hypotheses for things all the time, but until we're able to prove them with data, we're kind of skeptical of them. So one of our hypotheses is that if we were able to put more free instant access social content into our store, it would drive retention for our devices, right? Like, and retention is like the golden metric. If you can get people to stay in the headset longer, they will buy more software, they'll spend more time in it, they will buy like a larger amount of software. Like it is the metric that every other metric is improved by. So if you can get retention to improve, if you can get people to use the headset, more times per week or more months in sequence, then everybody's, all boats should rise. That is true. We know that to be true. And the thesis was, okay, well, if we put a bunch of free, easy access social content in there, won't that drive retention? We monitor this type of change really carefully. And I was up here a year ago saying, you know what, we put these worlds in there, and there was a small revenue regression. It was a 3% revenue regression, but you shouldn't worry because we made it up. We made up for it and more. We ended up the year like 12% up, so we paid all that down, and we got way better. Revenue's actually totally up, don't worry. And it's true. That's true. Actually, there was almost no revenue impact to including Horizon in our store. But boy, did you guys hate it. Like, we got more feedback on this particular design decision than almost anything else that I've seen in my tenure at Meta. And, and it makes sense, right? Like, if you're an app developer who spent, months or years with a team building something that was very expensive and difficult to build, kind of doesn't feel great, maybe if it's sitting right next to some user-generated content that maybe somebody put together in a weekend. Like, actually, there's some amazing Horizon worlds out there. I don't want to suggest that they're all garbage or something like that. That's not true. But it kind of feels bad, and we heard the message loud and clear, right? Like, this was not popular. And so we spent the year trying to prove the thesis that even if it wasn't popular, okay, it would have a net lift. And you will, if you have been paying attention to our store, you will have seen that, we went through several different treatments for what the splash page looks like. When you put on the headset, the very first thing you see, we had a couple of different experiments there of trying to display apps and worlds together in different ways and make them sexy, make you want to get into one or the other. We're doing a whole bunch of personalization work, so depending on who you are, you might actually have seen different versions of that. We had all kinds of experiments. But at the end, we sort of looked back and said, well, did this sort of achieve the lift we were looking for? And the answer is like, it just didn't. It wasn't strong enough of an impact for us to justify, and we had this developer sentiment, which we heard very loud and clear. And we take, the feedback that you give us extremely seriously. Like, it is a huge part of our decision-making process. So, listen, the hypothesis was not proved, and so we've changed course. And now, if you open up the App Store, as of today, we actually started rolling this out in February, but as of this week, it is now, I believe, rolled out to 100% of users. You open up your App Store, you will not see any worlds. Now, the worlds are not gone. They're in the Horizon app. You can open up the Horizon app and get to all these worlds. And I have to be very careful to say this is certainly not indicative of, the death of Horizon or anything like that. In fact, that product is is investing very heavily in a sort of new phase that's focused on its mobile app. It's got a new engine that they launched last year. It's actually super cool. There's a whole bunch of ongoing work there. You know, we're not quite ready to talk about the new stuff yet, but it'll be pretty soon, so stay tuned. But this particular change was the result of, you know, basically data collection analysis and quite clear feedback from you all. Now, what's it going to do to our platform? I don't know. It's too early. Like, we don't like assumptions, we don't like guessing, we like to collect the data and find out. But my guess is, now that I just said that I don't like guessing, my guess is that because including these worlds did not actually have a huge revenue impact, removing them probably won't either. Maybe there's a slight up, maybe it's neutral. We don't know yet, it's too early. Okay, so last one thing that I want to, before I move on to the store, I mentioned earlier that the increase in revenue that we saw was probably partially attributable to all these improvements we made to the store, but also partially attributable to developers doing a better job at marketing. And I want to talk about one of the themes we saw. Even though the successful titles that we saw in our ecosystem were highly diverse, there is a couple of themes that they sort of stuck out as similar across all of them. And one of them, the one that I want to talk about today, is the use of social media, in particular YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram Reels, as a way to acquire users. We look at our stats and we know that most of our customers in our store don't come to browse, right? They come to the store with a purchase already in their minds. And they go directly to the page of the thing they want to buy, and they buy it, and then they move on. And how do they find out about that? Like, how do they know what they want to go buy? Well, it turns out increasingly it's because they saw a TikTok about it, or they saw a reel about it, or they saw a streamer play it on YouTube. We had a developer from Japan called My Dearest. They are a long-term VR developer that shipped a bunch of products for our platform. And last year, they completely shifted their operating model. They were a fairly traditional game developer making pretty high-end video games. They shifted course and shifted into this model where they make a bunch of things really fast, and they had to build the muscle to figure out how to push a bunch of video to TikTok all the time because they didn't know how to do that. And they almost immediately, within several months, had their first success, which is a game called Devil's Roulette, pictured here. They wrote about this process on their blog. That's the link there. You could also just go to our developer blog and search for My Dearest, and you'll find it. But I want to point it out because this is an example of a developer like looking at the state of the market, like jumping on the thing that's working, and then changing their company like quite significantly in order to capitalize on it and being successful. And I'm not saying that every developer has to do that, but this was a really smart move. And I think increasingly we're seeing that reaching audiences outside of the platform, particularly our teen audiences, particularly through YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, is critical to success on the platform. Now, I want to spend a minute talking about audiences. I spent a lot of time in the previous, like a year ago, up here talking about audiences. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit more because it's actually super duper important, and it informs the way we think about the future of our platform. The short version of my talk last year is that our audiences are continuing to shift, right? We sort of started with these VR elites, these folks who are sort of hardcore gamers who also really like VR. We've recently acquired a whole bunch of teenagers and youth. They're super duper active. They're the most active users on our platform, and they sort of consume everything. And then we don't really have them yet, but we can see in the future these sort of mainstream adults on their way. In the next 2 years or so, we think that they're going to become a significant player in the ecosystem. And the meta point here is that like as VR becomes more mainstream, right? Like as we're more successful, we break out of the sort of early adopter niche. It's sort of obvious, right? Like the subsequent cohorts that we attract are not the same as the hardcore folks were. They're not the same as the early adopters. In fact, they have significantly different preferences. And honestly, between these three, we think that the overlap for the types of things that they all like is actually fairly narrow. They're actually pretty bespoke audiences who like pretty different things. And you could kind of think of this as like the VR elites were where we were at in 2020, 2023. And honestly, they're still in the platform. They're still a huge part of the platform. They're not spending in the way that they used to. My suspicion is they don't spend on other platforms either. I think there are macroeconomic reasons that particular audience is not spending as much on games as they used to. The teens are a more recent addition. They're the last 2 or 3 years. They have sort of come to life very dramatically and are now, like I said, driving a whole lot of our metrics. That's kind of today. And in the future, we think is these mainstream adults. And it's not like these replace each other. We think they're actually all going to be in our ecosystem at the same time, which means we have to start designing for a bifurcated audience, an audience that has a whole bunch of different, quite bespoke interests. Now, the folks to talk about, of course, are these mainstream adult people who are on their way. What's interesting about these people is they are not core gamers, but they play a lot of video games. They don't see themselves as gamers. They're mostly male. They're mostly between the ages of like 35 and 45. They're probably married, have kids at home, and they have a lot of disposable income. These are like, last year I think I described them as dads. They're not all like literally dads, but that's kind of my mental model. These are the type of people who, they bought VR not because they wanted to play Beat Saber. They might not have heard of Beat Saber. They bought VR because they thought that it's better than their TV. And increasingly, they're not wrong. Like as our headsets get lighter and the resolution increases, it's increasingly plausible to use a VR headset as a television display. You can watch Netflix, you can watch YouTube, whatever. And that's the purchase reason for this particular customer. These are the type of people who, when they need to buy an actual TV, they're going to go buy a big screen TV for their living room. They don't go to Costco and buy a $500 TV. They buy like a $3,000 Sony Bravia, even though they might not be able to tell the difference. Even though the $500 TV would be perfectly serviceable. No, they're really into the quality of the media they consume. They watch a lot of movies. They watch a lot of sports. They watch a lot of Netflix shows. Like these people spend a lot of time in media that's valuable to them. It's worth them spending money on. They don't think about the display. They don't think about their TV as a games device, right? It's just a TV. But when they get home, the very first thing they do is they plug their PlayStation into it. And in fact, we see they play a whole bunch of games. And as gamers, they're kind of mid-core. Right? These are not the Dark Souls folks. These are not the games that are going to make you feel bad if you don't play them really well. These are the folks who like to play strategy games, or they play social games, or they play puzzle games, or they play mystery and adventure games. Like they're a mid-core audience who enjoys playing games, and actually they spend quite a lot on video games, but they don't identify themselves as gamers. This is the behavior of this cohort that we're already seeing in our audience today, and we think is going to grow quite significantly. These folks are interesting because they are, not just because they're sort of, a large looming audience, but because they are quite different, we think, in their play style than our existing audiences. For example, if you bought your VR headset thinking that it's a replacement for your television, you probably assume that you're going to play video games sitting down. Like our audience of youth today, they are all over the place. They're wearing the headset, they're moving around, they're swinging their arms. They love it. That is not what this dude is going to do. They're going to sit down, watch a show, play some video games, whatever. It's a low-friction, relaxing experience for them, not a workout. These are the types of people, by the way, who Meta Horizon Plus are going to massively benefit. Because these people are going to get into our headset, and they're not even really going to be aware that their headset can also play video games. Maybe they know that, but they probably have absolutely no VR game experience. Maybe they tried VR at a mall in 2018. Like, that's it. They've never put a VR headset on in their life. And they are excited about games, interesting games, but they have no idea what it is. They look at our catalog, and they're not going to recognize any of the titles that are in there. If you are this person, even if you have disposable income, it's difficult to make like a $20 or $30 or $40 purchase up front of something you don't know anything about and you don't understand what the value of the platform is. So Meta Horizon Plus gives these people a way to like dabble in a bunch of high-quality software and understand, whether or not it's something that they want, and then sort of onboard them into how amazing VR is. And we had this hypothesis, it turned out to be true. If you are a subscriber to Meta Horizon Plus, you spend more money in our store than regular, normal people. These folks are going to massively benefit from that program. So I talked about the mainstream goods, they're important. I have one other thing I want to talk about. Up until now, these slides have been based on a whole bunch of research and data analysis that we've done internally. Like the stats that I've given you, the revenue things, these sort of cohorts for customers. These are not things I made up. These are the work of significant multi-year research projects, and I feel very confident in their accuracy. From here on out, this is like my conjecture. I don't have a huge research project telling me this part is true. This is mainly my job. Part of my job is to try to like read tea leaves and see where the industry is going. And this is, I'm going to just spend a minute talking about an idea that I have that may or may not end up being true. I'm interested in the teenagers. I'm interested in the teenagers because when we say teenagers, so you might have heard the term TIA, like teens and young adults. That's actually two very different audiences. Teens and young adults are actually two super different audiences. And in particular, my hypothesis is that if you're under 15, you are a different type of gamer than if you're over 15. And the main reason is that your tastes change. As you grow up, you like acquire taste. And It's true. I'm not trying to I really am not trying to throw the games that are targeted at 15-year-olds and under the bus. No, they're making a great business making the types of games that audience likes. But it's not just in video games. Like as you get a little bit older, you start to watch R-rated movies. You start to enjoy content and media that's more sophisticated than what you enjoyed before. And at least the pattern I've witnessed is that you start to look at the content that you liked before and think, well, that's a little bit childish. And I think that as you get older, as you sort of finish the puberty cycle and you start to go up and become an adult, like you're looking for things that are more challenging to you. And the stuff that I think the traditional game industry values, like fit and finish, polish, graphics quality, things that maybe don't really matter very much to the younger crowd, that actually starts to matter more to you because you start to associate that with quality. If you look at like the publicly available data for Roblox and Fortnite, it seems to me that Fortnite does a little bit better job of retaining people who are 19 or 20. And my hypothesis there is like Fortnite's very polished. It's super duper polished. It's got high production value. I think it's a little bit better at retaining these sort of older teenagers. There's some things that don't change. Like, as far as I can tell, the youth, the middle school and early high school students, they're super duper into social connection. They're into streaming and they're into sharing their cool ideas with communities. They love humor. They love deep lore. They want to go explore all the lore outside of the game. I don't think those things change. Those remain values to this sort of older audience as they age up. But the content of the game they're playing, I think changes over time. And I think this is not just like specific to VR. This is true for teenagers in general. I have a 13-year-old home who helped me write the slide. As they get older, their tastes change. And so here's my idea. I think if you think that the game industry and all markets probably are like sort of sine waves, and they go up and they come down. I don't know if we're at the bottom right now, but certainly it's been a lot of downward lately. Eventually, it's got to come up. And we have this sort of softness in our core gamer segment. We talked about how even on our platform, the VR elites are here, but they're not really spending in the way that they used to. I'm wondering if one of the ways, as economically, we counteract that softness is we start looking at this like new generation of core gamers, which are essentially the teenagers of today growing up into young adults. If you think about it, like the folks that have been playing Gorilla Tag for the last 2 or 3 years, by like 2028, those folks are in college, or maybe some of them will have exited college and they'll be in the workforce. There's a transition that I think happens there. That's going to happen. It's happening right now over the next 2 or 3 years, where we have an audience of people who are VR natives. This is folks who, like, since they were able to play any kind of sophisticated video game, VR has been available in their lives. They've been playing it since they were 12. Right? They don't seem to be particularly susceptible, although I don't have data. They don't seem to be particularly susceptible to like motion sickness, for example. They seem to be super open to moving their body around and playing in VR, and they love that interface. These people are going to become adults. We've never had young adults ever in the history of humanity that were sort of VR native. So like, what are they going to want? Right? Like, what are they going to want? I suspect that they remain a pretty core group of players, even as they age up, but the games they play are going to change, and the amount of money they'll have available to spend is going to change too. So here's my conjecture. My conjecture is that there's already some titles out there that are indications of the types of things that these people are probably going to want in the next 2 or 3 years, is my guess. As the current group of teenagers ages up and a new group of teenagers comes in and replaces them, the sort of older 18-plus crowd. I think if you look at the titles, like for example on Steam, that fit that sort of high physics, humorous multiplayer co-op with serendipity events that happen where you've got a sort of a messy physics system and you're playing with other people and funny things happen because you can't control it. Titles like Peak and Repo are very much that form, but polished. They're super polished. They're made by very pro teams, and they've done extremely well on Steam. And my hypothesis is they're doing extremely well with an older audience. It's actually not the under 14s who are still playing a lot of Roblox. It's older people, and it's the same type of game. It's the same type of game, but executed in a way that's high polish and high quality. And that my hypothesis is that those types of games are going to continue to be significantly impactful in the next 2 or 3 years, both in VR and outside of it, because this group is going to age up and acquire taste. I also think there's a place for story games. If you watch the trend of story games, when we say story games, it's like a really wide spectrum. When I say a story game, I don't actually mean The Last of Us or Death Stranding. Those games are amazing. I love them. There's like 5 companies in the world that can afford to build them at this point. And they're super duper risky to build. And if you're one of those 5 companies, please build more of them because I really like them. But if you're not, don't, because it's really risky. The type of story games I'm talking about that are more likely to be successful, I think, are these titles that are extremely low cost to build. Somewhere between an adventure game and a visual novel, something where the actual rendering of the art does not require facial capture, it does not require voiceover, but there's a whole bunch of focus on the story, and the games sell because of the story, but their actual production cost is very low. These are successful in 2D today. We have not seen as many of them in VR, but I think that the other type of content that this older Taya audience, this older young audience is going to like is going to be story content. And it's going to be mainstream genres, horror, romance, mystery, those types of genres. Does not have to be the be-all, end-all of video game narratives. I think this content will sell well. Again, this is my conjecture, but I wanted to include it because part of my job is trying to think 2 or 3 years from now, like if I'm going to go sign a video game, what should I sign? Who am I signing it for? And who is the likely audience going to be? And I can look at this year's data and extrapolate a little bit, but I actually have to be thinking a little bit harder than that. And I would like all you to think about that as well. I don't necessarily have this right. This is my guess. But because we're in a world where the audience is bifurcating very quickly, and the behavior of the ecosystem is sort of less predictable than it used to be, this is the type of thinking that I hope that all of you are doing when considering what you're building and who you're building it for. All right. Let's talk about hand tracking. This is a pretty business-heavy talk. I spent, if you want to come to the State of the VR Ecosystem talk, it's because you want to make business decisions, and so you need a bunch of business insight in order to make business decisions, and so I spend almost all of the talk on those things, but after 12 years, Meta has yet to figure out that I'm actually an engineer and a game designer who's only cosplaying as a business person. So I am going to spend a few minutes talking about hand tracking from a game design perspective, because I think it's important. Now, why do I think it's important? Well, we go back to audiences, because these guys are going to basically be hand tracking only, we think. The folks who are buying this headset because they think it is a TV, they're not going to charge their controllers. They're not going to sit there and put the lanyards on and like, oh, they got them on the wrong hands, now they got to switch them. Gamers will do that. Gamers are high intent players. They're getting into the headset because they're like, I'll see you guys in 2 hours. They're gonna click in, they're gonna play, they're gonna log. But if you think that you have a TV, you just want to put this thing on and go. You don't have time for controllers. In fact, you associate controllers with the game system. You think you bought a TV. Why do you need that crap? That's the way I think they're going to think. So we believe that basically all of this audience, the likely interface that they use as their core input is hand tracking. We got a whole bunch of hand track titles on the store, but this is still like a very early area of research for us. The technology works pretty cool, but exactly how to use it is not, I think, very well understood. So I thought I'd just take a little bit to talk about some of the things that we've learned. I spent many years, I built console games, and then I went and I built mobile games. And there was a period in mobile games where folks didn't really know how to deal with a touchscreen. And the very first thing we all tried to do was like put sticks and buttons on the touchscreen, and that like sort of worked, but it sort of felt bad. That's where I feel like a lot of the hand track content is today. Like we're sort of mapping a existing paradigm into a new input format, and it kind of works. But actually, the better stuff is the stuff that's built from the ground up, for this interface. So why should you care about hand tracking? Well, the main reason is that I think that there's going to be a large audience that requires it, but also it's super magical, right? Like we've spent a huge amount of time, like years, teaching developers how to get their virtual hands aligned to your real hands when you use a controller. There's a thing that happens called registration, which is when your brain looks at your virtual hands and it's like, oh yeah, those are my hands. And it just accepts that your virtual hands are your real hands. And it doesn't work if your hands are like slightly offset, or if they're slightly the wrong size, your brain will be like, well, that's wrong. But if they're right, and if they're perfectly aligned, then we can get your brain to forget that the hands you're seeing are actually not your real hands. It's work. I mean, even now with our touch controllers, I work with developers all the time on making sure their hands are perfectly aligned. That's free and automatic with hand tracking. Like we know where your hands are, we see them, we render them, you have full articulation of your fingers, it's just your hands. Your brain doesn't think about it twice. The level of immersive and expressiveness that you can get with hand tracking, particularly like in a social situation, like you want to give somebody the finger in a social app, you can. Like you have a lot of control over expressiveness when you have full articulation of your fingers. There's challenges as well, though, right? Like the user is coming to hand tracking as a technology with a bunch of preconceived notions. All of them think what they want is Minority Report, this stuff, and they definitely don't want that. And everybody tries to implement it, and it doesn't work, and then they find out that Hollywood has lied to them. But that they come to the platform with expectations of how it's going to work, and they don't necessarily match the actual technology. Tracking is harder. You don't have tactility, like you don't have buttons and sticks that you're feeling any longer, so you lose something there. And the complexity has to be reduced in order to make hand tracking work. So let me just tell you about a few of the sort of design things to keep in mind if you go down this route. And I highly recommend you at least play with this stuff. I think it is an important part of the future, and it's like kind of greenfield design space at the moment, so it's super interesting. The way hand tracking works is we use the cameras in the headset to look at your hands, and then we use computer vision to figure out where they are, and then we render them in VR. That's cool. That part works great. The part where developers get stuck is they then take our hand inputs and they try to go too complicated with their actual game controls. And so the number one thing that I want to tell you, and honestly this is not my words, these are the words of the designers we have on staff who spend all day thinking about this stuff, is that you want to keep this stuff simple. You want to keep your core interaction as simple as possible. And you want to find a particular mechanic, a particular interaction that works really well, and then build your whole game as variants of that. The number one failure we've seen is overcomplication. There's kind of two different ways to use hand tracking. There's more than two, but two big ways to use hand tracking. One is direct interaction, like I'm going to grab stuff that's 3D in front of me and I'm going to manipulate it. And the other is some sort of complicated gesture, this guy or whatever. And both are valuable. We have an interaction SDK, by the way, that will implement a whole bunch of the common gestures for you. You don't have to write that code. We've got it. You should just use our SDK. But gestures have more cognitive load than direct manipulation. Like if a player has to think about what all the different gestures are, there's only a few that they can hold on their brains at one time before they start to forget. So if you go with gestures, you got to keep them simple and you got to keep as few as possible. You also want to basically bias all of your interactions for hands into the near field. There is a lot better results working on something that's right in front of you than there is working on stuff that's sort of farther out. In fact, when you go further out, you're probably going to have to change the interaction mode from a sort of direct manipulation thing to some sort of raycast. And it's fine, you can do that, but the transition between when you go from sort of raycast to direct manipulation can be tricky, and it's something that you can't take for granted. You need to think about it up front. You also, just like with controllers, you want to focus on physical interactions that have sort of obvious affordances. Like when you see a coffee cup, you don't pick it up by the base of the coffee cup, you pick it up by the handle. And you don't push a rope, you pull a rope. Like you design the interactions around the obvious way that you interact with them, so the player doesn't have to think about it. And it's easier to do the direct interactions, it's easier to pick up objects to play with than it is to do menus with raycasts and clicking. Now, our whole operating system, when you boot up into our headset, is 2D menus with raycasts and clicking. So obviously, we've spent a lot of time making this work. But for video games, my recommendation is start with direct 3D object manipulation. It's also fatigue is an issue. The reason that Minority Report doesn't work is not because you can't track the hands, it's because you get tired. Anytime you have to hold your hands above your heart, you're going to get tired. The player's going to get tired. You need to design for comfort. You need to design particularly if you want somebody to stick around in your video game for hours, then you need to design an interaction that's not going to tire them out. Prioritization of comfort is really important, and I would say try to optimize the areas that you're having interactions happen in zones that are comfortable, kind of maybe down here somewhere. There's other maybe more nuanced elements of this sort of comfort idea, maybe you don't want to put the player under a ton of time pressure when they have to do these things. Because by definition, if you're using hand tracking, you're probably a mid-core gamer, and also if the input is not quite as reliable or quite as fast as controllers, the additional time pressure is going to make it feel like it's missing more often. Just a few other practical challenges with hand tracking. It's camera-based, so there's occlusion problems. If you put one hand in front of the other, we don't know what the hand that's behind your hand is doing. So you should probably design your game to avoid that type of interaction. One of the super interesting things that our designers figured out and came and told me about was that your ability to send input to a video game with controllers is like actually very, very fast, because you can be doing multiple things at once, right? Like you can have a stick inflected, and you can be holding like trigger, and you can be hitting a button all at the same time. There's like a ton of input going into the video game from your controllers at once. And when you switch to hand tracking, even if the registration of the gesture or whatever it is, even if that is very fast, the actions tend to be serial rather than simultaneous. Like you do one thing at a time instead of multiple things at the same time. And because of that, the rate of input that goes like from your player to your video game is going to slow down. And you actually need to step back and like maybe redesign the game to account for the fact that the inputs are going to come in slower than they used to. And particularly if you're doing like a conversion from a controller-based game to a hand track-based game. It is quite challenging to figure out how to do multiple actions at the same time. It actually may require like a deeper level of rethinking of the game design or rebalancing. We also don't have a fantastic solution for smooth locomotion. You no longer have an analog stick. There are a whole bunch of experiments, and actually some of them are super good. Like there's some games out there that have a great motion system that works great for them, but we don't have anything where it's like, this is the one way to do it. This is the canonical way to do smooth motion in VR with hand tracking yet. If one of you guys figures that out, that'd be really cool. The main message I want to give you about hand tracking here is that this is an important technology for the future. We think that this is going to be part of the story that unlocks VR to a significantly larger audience. Like the size of those midstream gamers who think they're buying a television set is gigantic. The number of people out there who might buy a VR headset if they can use it this way is really, really large. And that's why we're interested in them. That's why you should be interested in them too. But they aren't likely to actually own controllers or use controllers. And so it's worth sitting down and trying to figure out what the correct practices for hand tracking for your game actually are. When you do this, your number one goal is reliability. Like whatever your gesture, whatever your input is, it needs to work every time. And the player needs to know that it's working every time. And if there's some chance that it fails, they need very specific feedback that it's failed so that they can try it again. If you don't do that, then the input will feel unreliable and the player will absolutely be frustrated. Number two is comfort. Don't tire your people out. Don't make them hold their hands above their heart. Be optimized for comfortable spaces. And number three is intuitive interactions like direct manipulation and grabbing. Those are basically the top three things. This is a little preview of some of the content that we have in this unbelievably meaty hand tracking best practices document that we published last year. If you wondered why my slides suddenly started looking super professional, it's because I just stole the images from this best practices thing that our design team and our hand tracking team built. You should go read this. I've only given you sort of scratch the surface. My goal is to sort of pique your interest about the sort of design space and the design challenge here, communicate to you how important hand tracking is for the future, but also there's just a ton more. There's a ton more to learn. There's a ton more precedent. We've got demos and videos and all kinds of stuff in there, so you should check it out. Okay, so that is I've got 10 minutes left. I want to make sure I leave some time for questions. Listen, I wanted to make sure we covered a look back for 25 revenue and growth. I wanted to talk about improvements we made to our store. We talked about audiences. And it was important to me to spend a little bit of time talking about hand tracking. This has been kind of a bunch of different, sort of related topics all together. But again, I sat down and I thought, if I was in your shoes, what would I want to know? And this is, to me, from where I sit, the most important information that I can communicate to you. We have this QR code here. This is a survey link, and I would very much like to hear your feedback. I'd like to hear more about what you thought about this talk, any kind of feelings you have in general. Please let us know how we're doing. And with that, I will take questions. We have 2 microphones here, I think.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Briggs. I'm a professor at the University of Central Florida and part of the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. And as you can tell, I'm a big supernatural athlete. It's changed my life. There's a lot of concern from the announcement, I think it was about 8 weeks ago. But I do think it's important to realize you do have that demographic already in that app for sure. I work out every morning with an 80-year-old who beats my butt, and we do about an hour in the headset every day. So I don't know if now's the appropriate time or anything like that, but I do have suggestions to improve the app instead of it kind of everybody thinks it's going to just fade out into oblivion soon. So.
Sure. Well, thank you for coming, and I really appreciate we're all big fans of Supernatural. It continues to exist as a product. It's the team has gotten smaller, but we're still operating it. And there's also, I would say, fitness is an important segment of our non-games group. In fact, it's probably the single largest segment of any sort of non-game category that we have today. It's not just Supernatural. We also have FitXR and a number of other third-party developers who do quite well. Honestly, fitness has been the way that a lot of women on our platform have come to VR, and that's super duper important to me. I don't work on the FitXR team. That's part of our first-party group, but I'd be very happy to take your feedback and deliver it to the team. Thank you.
Hi.
Frank, how's it going?
Hi, Chris. Well, I have to say it's really nice to see you. I mean that. Again.
Good to see you too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing this. Again, Frank from my game is a Little Planet. So, question about you just mentioned that for those young kids, they can become VR elites. It takes some time.
Yeah.
And for those mainstream adult, right, they're coming in when the headset become lighter, clearer, and cheaper. Mm-hmm. It's still coming in probably a few years later.
Yeah, next 2 years, something like that.
So the question is that for a studio like this, they've been around, all right, VR elites is not spending, and we have a lot of kids. What is your suggestion? Because we have paycheck to take care next month, next year. So what's the best strategy for us to hang in here instead of, there's a lot of things we can do out there. So
yeah,
thank you.
I think it's the question, right? Like that's why I spend all this time talking about audiences and the way audiences shift and the way audiences shift over time. Because I think if you're shipping this year, the answer is very different than if you're shipping 2 years from now. If you're shipping this year, you should target teens. You should target teens that are, under the age of 16 for the most part. The people who are loving Gorilla Tag, they love Roblox. That's the audience. In 2 or 3 years, some of those kids will have grown up, and maybe the games that they're going to play are a little bit different. But today, the most active audience today is the middle school and high school age teenagers. These mainstream adult folks, they don't really exist in the ecosystem now. We can see them. There's enough of them, but they're a very small cohort today. Our projection is that they grow very significantly, and we're making a bunch of data and research-based projections about how they're going to behave. But they don't, to be very clear, they don't exist on the platform today. And so, if you're going to develop for them in the next 2 years, well, then hand tracking is the thing. Hand tracking, mid-core, maybe with some MR, maybe be able to play seated. You want a strategy game or a life simulation game or a puzzle game, something that audience of mid-core gamers is going to enjoy, I think would be my answer. In the longer term, I think about these things as curves. I don't think the VR elite are gone forever. I think that actually core gamers will eventually return both to our platform and all other platforms. And they're going to want big, bombastic, high graphics, action games, the types of things that core gamers always play. But that's not soon. That's a couple of years in the future. So I think that the answer is really dependent on when you need to generate revenue. If it's right now, the answer is pretty clear. It's the next 2 years, well, I think the teens are going to stick around. That's a pretty safe bet. But we also expect that some of these other cohorts, the older teens and the mainstream adults, will become relevant.
So for the games that have been developed for a certain period of time, it's not that easy to just change the target audience to the teams, right? Yep. Right away. So what do you suggest? Should we
TikTok? I'm not joking. The games that are Thrill of Fight 2 has been in development for years. Yeah. It came out and did very well. We signed it in an era that was completely different than today. It's done very well, partially because Thrill of Fight 1 did very well and they're able to capitalize on the existing audience there, but also because the publisher did a great job with marketing. And I can't overemphasize how important it is for developers to go out and find an audience themselves. Because as I said, most of the customers come to the store with a title already in mind that they want to purchase. So I think the big gap I've seen on titles that were otherwise fantastic but didn't do very well was that they just didn't do any marketing, or they didn't do sufficient marketing to actually acquire a customer base.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Hi. If this is a similar question that I asked the other day in here, if one were hypothetically audacious enough to imagine that they developed this canonical method of locomotion using hand tracking and
Yep.
actually filed a patent for it. And
Exciting.
and was interested in seeing it come out to the world. Would the best way for that person to do that to just prove it by first developing their own content, or would there be some open channel to Meta if Meta was interested, or are you only interested in what your own designers do internally?
I think the history of our history of us like defining what core interactions for VR should be, rather than the third-party development community, is basically zero. Like basically every major gameplay interaction that you see as like a normal thing in VR today, somebody outside of Meta came up with, often on our platform, but it wasn't us that came up with it. Like we get surprised all the time. Like we did not expect Beat Saber. We did not expect Gorilla Tag. And I don't think, honestly, that we try to anticipate every possible canonical use case, because actually it's the game designers and the game developers who know their software much better than we do. So our approach is actually to put out like a basis. Like if you look at our hand tracking interaction SDK, it doesn't have the be all end all canonical solution for virtual motion. What it has is a bunch of really basic, very well implemented gesture recognition pieces in there, so you don't have to write the basic stuff. But how you use that in your game, you're going to know way better than we do. So I would propose that it's actually like unlikely to be Meta that solves that problem. It's much more likely for a third party to show up with software that blows the world up, and then everybody goes, oh, that's how you do it.
So the idea is that you wait for that to happen rather than being more proactive to solicit it.
We have all kinds of experience. We're deeply in the area of research. I mean, we've built this entire set of best practices based on ongoing UXR tests and games we're developing. Like we're deeply into it. I just mean like statistically, if you look back in the last like 10 years or so, generally it's not us. Generally it's the third parties who are experimenting.
No, I'm aware. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Go over here. I'll just switch back and forth.
Good morning, Chris.
How's it going?
Good, thanks. I think my conjecture is that mixed reality stuff you're doing in your own home through your headset as if it was AR glasses, which are coming, is the sort of untapped into immediate green fields that are ahead of us. I think in the short term, I would love to see you guys invest more in sort of looking into that stuff and games that, because I mean, you don't have data, it's new, right? So we have all this data on other things from the past, other types of game platforms, right? We now have these headsets that I could have a 80-inch TV on my wall if I want to do that, and we've seen tons of interesting experiences coming out that do both full VR and some set of mixed reality. Some are completely there. It's also probably the most comfortable way to get new people in, I believe. And it's cool to like do hand tracking and stuff like that, and it'll be super duper important when it is full just AR nice glasses that anybody can put on, right? I mean, I make a hand-in-hand partner dancing game, and I'm not interested in hand tracking, not because it isn't cool, but like every headset comes with controllers. They work out of the box. It's easier. There's no occlusion. I'll get there when I feel like there's a market for.
Sure. Fair enough.
So I think that to me seems like a place that bets on the future, right, and develops new types of games that, like, and I haven't seen as much of a feeling. I haven't seen as much of like a.
I would say like stay tuned. Like we have a whole bunch in development right now. Like that. Like I didn't talk about MR very much this talk. I talked about it a lot last year and in previous years. It's absolutely an area of focus for us. It's another one, as you said, those mainstream gamers are going to sit on their couch. Like if they don't actually have to be fully immersed. One of the things we learned is that like gamers love to be fully immersed, but like regular people, that scares them a little bit.
But before,
like,
I don't want to take up too much of other folks' time too. Is like a little bit of a question / feedback on the. I love that you guys are very database. It's sort of a meta core. Competency, and it's into the Oculus and, your guys' division, right? I appreciate all of the data. It feels like there's hard right turns often instead of lane changes.
Absolutely.
And I do think sometimes we know something's coming that we wouldn't have data for. Like we know we'll have hand tracking. We know we'll have, we have pass through.
Yeah.
But again, we don't have any data to back it up because it's never been around before.
Absolutely. I mean, we're living on the bleeding edge. And I don't disagree, and my intent with this type of talk is to give you some insight into how we're thinking about it. You may or may not agree, but to give some insight of like the trends we see coming down the line.
No, I'm
and we don't necessarily have our provable data yet either. But we have hypotheses, and that's how.
Thank
we're
you for
thinking
calling
about
them hypotheses, by the way.
Cheers. All right, I can take, I think, one more, and then if there's other overall questions, I'm very happy to meet you out in the hallway afterwards.
Okay, thank you for your speech. I'm glad to hear that Horizon Store is growing up, but let me ask some things. So as far as I remember correctly, last couple of years or 3 years, 100 plus titles making 1 million plus revenue in the Horizon Store. It never changed 100 plus. You never say like 150 or 200. So I'm skeptical it's actually growing. Also, last couple of years, how many new titles made 1 million plus revenue made it? Because like the last couple of years, I'm tracking the Horizon Store like revenue top 50 revenue sales, like tracking it, and most of us know that the title never change. You know, maybe a couple of, maybe 5, but top 50 never always be there. So I want to ask you that, is there actually many new titles making money there? And if it's no, then maybe, have you ever thought about it's a problem of self-reinforcing cycle? So they are always there, just selling there again.
Yeah, I actually don't know. I don't have the number in front of me, like how many of those 100 were new launches, how many are not. But I will say, like, every ecosystem is an exponential curve, right? Like our platform, every other platform. If you're looking at only the very top, like it's very hard for the very top to move. It's true on iOS. It's true on every other platform as well. Because those things, you know, once you get large enough, you do marketing, you do branding. It's easier for the customers to know. You can reinforce your success more successfully. That doesn't actually mean that the folks below that aren't making money. All 3 of the titles that I talked about today came out in 2025. They're all brand new. UGG in particular, which has got a talk later today, has only been out for a handful of months, and it's doing extremely well. Like, there's actually a large number of, you know, brand new success stories. And we started our Accelerator program primarily because we saw that there were things that were coming out of organically out of the ecosystem that we didn't predict, that we thought we could make bigger, and that's what we're doing there, our Accelerator program on. So I apologize, I don't have like the specific detail. I don't think it's the case. Like the sort of question underneath your question is like, is it just the same 100 developers making? No, I don't think that's true. Okay. You know, the couple of folks at the top, yeah, sure. There's like every other platform. It's pretty hard to beat Call of Duty, but like that doesn't mean that the rest of the ecosystem is not healthy.
Okay, just one last suggestion this time.
Sure.
So you say like most of folks coming in mind to buy game your store. So like in the case, users will see the PDP, right? So like they look through things and actually decide to buy, you know, clicking.
Yes.
So below there, if you make suggestion games related to this kind of game page,
absolutely.
if you make it, then I think you can expose more other games for other developers.
Yes, I actually really like that suggestion. We've talked about it internally as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for coming. I'm going to let them get set up for the next talk. I'm very happy to meet you out in the hall if you have more talks. Thank you very much.